Right now, Russia was hit hard by NATO equipment. European forces are striking at Russia. Shocking decisions have already been made by Britain and other partners. There's a real disaster in the armies. You need to see this. There's just no equipment. Hellish explosions in Russia. Ukrainian drones have destroyed key facilities inside Russia. All of this coming up next in our broadcast. Hotspot. European forces are entering the fight. Britain and Norway are seriously taking on Putin. This agreement will hit the Kremlin hard. What's it about? And what do these actions from Europe threaten Putin with? Watch the story.
Britain and Norway began negotiations last Thursday on a defense agreement that can counter the threat from Russia. In the Arctic, according to the publication Politica, British Defence Minister John Healey met with his Norwegian counterpart, Tor Mikkel Wara, at the Norwegian Joint Headquarters, a fortress dug deep into the slope of a mountain, not far from the northern city of Bodo, just above the Arctic Circle.
Britain is determined to play a leading role in European security, supporting the foundations of our safety and prosperity at home, and showing our adversaries that we are united in our resolve to protect our interests. Norway remains one of Britain's most important allies. We will create a new era of defense partnership that will bring us closer than ever before, as we tackle growing threats, strengthen NATO, and enhance our security. In the far north,
the defense agreement provides for closer cooperation between the armed forces of the two countries, including the protection of underwater cables from sabotage. After Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, ships heading to or from Russian ports were suspected of severing key links in European infrastructure, whether accidentally or through sabotage, especially in the Baltic Sea.
Russia's Arctic potential, military potential, greatly exceeds the potential of those countries, other countries, primarily NATO countries that are in the Arctic basin. So, of course, we need to strengthen both investments and increase the armed formations, that fleet, those submarines, the icebreaker fleet that is located there, because otherwise, it's important to understand that this is a very significant region.
Healey's visit followed the entry of a Russian spy ship into British waters in January and November of last year. Last month, the defense minister informed Parliament that the vessel was used for gathering intelligence and mapping. The map of critically important underwater infrastructure in the UK before it headed to the North Sea,
especially in the Arctic, Russia has nothing to seize, but a serious military presence threatens everyone. Why? Because actually, the shortest route from Russia to the United States goes precisely through the Arctic. For ballistic missiles. So, of course, the Arctic region is important.
Russian nuclear submarines are on constant duty in the Arctic, which complicates the global security situation. After all, as we know, Russia cannot be trusted, and it has proven this more than once.
Putin's Russia. It threatens the whole world. Don't think that all threats are limited. The Ukrainian theater of military operations, and Putin needs 4 regions that he recorded in the constitution of Russia. Of course not. Putin needs control over at least part of it. Over Eastern Europe, not just over the former republics of the Soviet Union, but even more.
Global warming, which facilitates oil extraction as well as military presence, attracts Putin to the Arctic. And now, let's discuss what such a passion could lead to in the studio.
While the new US administration enthusiastically organizes global talks to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, European partners are seriously concerned about providing substantial and reliable security guarantees for Ukrainians. The White House also agrees that the security of Ukraine should primarily be the responsibility of European countries. What should these guarantees be like so that they don't end up being as useless as the infamous Budapest Memorandum?
There are 2 fundamental positions. The first position is that it is extremely important for us to ensure that Russia does not have the ability to attack Ukraine in the future, because such conditions will persist, and we understand that such risks will be present for a long time. And in this context, the development of a formula for either the country's accession to NATO or the deployment of foreign troops on Ukrainian territory, troops, weapons, and resources to support us.
In the near future, Ukraine will not be able to join NATO, and the North Atlantic Alliance will not be able to deploy its troops as a peacekeeping contingent along the line of demarcation. Russia categorically disagrees with this. The option of deploying troops from individual European countries is quite a likely scenario, military analysts say.
The only possible option for deploying peacekeepers, I want to emphasize again, is bilateral agreements between Ukraine and the countries, and with each individual country. But again, there's one nuance here. Article 17 of the Constitution of Ukraine, which prohibits deployment and such states on the territory of Ukraine. And accordingly, the deployment of peacekeepers means a constant presence. That is, these are the bases.
And such ambushes are like in Minecraft? The first leaders of the old world have already started talking about the options. Yes, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, stated that he is ready and willing to send his country's troops to support any peace agreement.
But it also means the readiness and willingness to contribute, to ensure the security guarantees for Ukraine. We need to deploy our own troops on the ground, if necessary. I'm not saying this lightly. I feel a deep sense of responsibility regarding the potential threat to British servicemen.
Sweden's Foreign Minister Maria Malmer also spoke about the possible deployment of their military contingent. She stated that the country does not rule out sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if necessary.
Right now, we need to first agree on a fair and sustainable world that respects international law. When we have such peace, it will need to be maintained, and for this our government is not ruling anything out.
Earlier, the French side also spoke about the peacekeeping contingent. In general, we're talking about a little over 100,000 peacekeepers from different countries. Meanwhile, Russia's mobilization resource is about 15 million people, and this number far exceeds the capabilities of Ukraine and our partners. So the main security guarantees for Ukraine are modern high-tech weapons of domestic production, plus assistance from European partners.
At the moment, the Ukrainian defense industry can meet the needs of Ukraine's defense forces at a level of 30%. Unfortunately, this very factor is the Achilles heel that our strategic partners are pressing on, fully understanding that without external military technical assistance, it will be quite problematic for Ukraine. So the development of our own army, yes, increasing its numbers, which the president talks about, but at the same time, first and foremost, we need to clearly understand that this is a war of technologies. We can defeat the Russian Federation not by the number of personnel, but by high-tech types of weaponry.
Uninterrupted and large-scale supplies of weapons, generous investments in the Ukrainian defense industry, and a contingent of foreign peacekeepers. Here are the three pillars on which reliable international guarantees should be based, thanks to which Ukrainians will not feel deceived or abandoned in their fierce struggle for the security of the entire European continent.
At this moment, Ukrainian armed forces have managed to slow down the enemy's advance near Toretsk. And right under Toretsk, the Azov Brigade is powerfully taking out the Russians with NATO equipment. The losses of the occupiers are shocking. Exclusive footage from the front line follows.
After Trump's announcement of a future meeting with Russian dictator and war criminal Putin, little has changed here in the Toretsk direction, at least for the Azov Brigade. The Russian infantry is pushing forward, but the brigade's fighters are stopping them, and for now, they have what it takes. Finally, Azov has started receiving powerful Western equipment. In particular, these are probably the newest artillery systems in the world called Edith. The fresh Czech Dita guns made last year have significantly increased the capabilities of the Azov Brigade. It can, if needed, reach the enemy deep in their rear at a distance of 39 kilometers. To this position, almost everything is done automatically, from loading to targeting.
It aims itself, so the entire loading system is automated. It also approaches the firing position automatically. The only thing that is pressed mechanically is the fire button.
Dita can fire several shells on different trajectories, but in such a way that they hit the same target almost simultaneously, so there's no escaping it. The main advantages over Russian artillery are accuracy, range, and speed. This makes the Czech system an indispensable element of counter-battery warfare. But counter-battery warfare in Toretsk is not just about hunting enemy guns. Right now, the fighters are trying to stop the advance of the Russian infantry. To do this, it's necessary to neutralize the drone control point that covers the advance of the enemy infantry.
It hit the target area from where they launch.
The Ukrainian group in the Toretsk area is currently operating as a single mechanism that grinds down the enemy, who has already claimed several times that they have taken Toretsk. The Russian occupiers even climbed to the top of the Toretsk mine to raise the tricolor flag above it. But the Ukrainian artillery interrupted the Russian mission with several precise strikes. The FPV drone shot down a tricolor rag. Next, the 28th Brigade, with the support of the 2nd Battalion of the Cold Yar fighters, raised our blue and yellow flag on a tall structure. But the Russian commanders continued to send disposable soldiers with new tricolors for media videos.
Raise the flag. We need to show that we really have taken Toretsk, that our flags are there? No, that's not true. Toretsk is below us, part of it is below us. We are fighting for it now and will continue to fight for it.
Toretsk is one of the priorities of the Russian offensive. Despite all the statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense, the enemy hasn't taken it, but they have effectively divided the city in half, capturing its central part.
50%, maybe a little less than 50. And right now we are holding it. Maybe 1 or 2 people are sneaking into our rear and the enemy reports that they have taken the mine, figuratively speaking. Or they took Toretsk because there are 2 of our guys on the outskirts. But we are currently in the center and the fact that 2 people have slipped through is temporary. We'll kill them no matter what, if not tomorrow then the day after, but that's 100%.
In small groups, the occupiers are trying to infiltrate between the positions of the Ukrainian forces in the Toretsk area. Sometimes they succeed, but most of these groups are suicide squads.
For the most part, it's reconnaissance. In theory, out of a group of 18 people, only 2 survive, who just relay some movements or any information.
This wounded occupier chose life and is crawling on his knees to surrender to the positions of the Azov Brigade.
He just crawls into the basement and says, I don't understand why this war is even necessary. So why did you come here if you don't understand why this war is necessary? Patronymik.
What? Ding Ding Valley. A Russian was brought out by the Azov drone.
Then your drone stopped and dropped me some water. He's like, a drink. Don't worry, it's not poisoned. They were talking to him through the drone with a speaker. Yes, I drank, and he says, are you going to surrender? If you do, you'll sit tight, raise your left hand. I raised his hand.
He saved the occupier's life because his own people wanted to eliminate him.
And when he saw our drones, he said, pretend to be 200. And I pretended that they were 200. Our drones hovered above me, circled around, and then flew away. Could your drones have finished you off? Yes, if they give the signal, they can finish you off.
3 stormtroopers survived from his group. All of them were captured by the Azov fighters. All 3 were contract soldiers who went to a foreign country with weapons of their own accord. The motive is money.
They just put all of Russia into debt. You're saying really terrifying things right now. Do you understand? You're talking about your mortgage, which we don't need here at all. You're comparing this to people's lives. Do you understand? Because of the mortgage, I don't know. Because of a criminal record, some of yours. Did you kill anyone here? They could have killed.
Behind Toretsk, the Ukrainian army is building several lines of defense with bunkers, firing points, and dragon's teeth. If we can't hold the city, we'll fall back here.
Artillerymen work the same way during a withdrawal, and so do the mortarmen. Only later will the infantry actually enter these bunkers. They enter a prepared position, and already under combat operations, the infantryman perfects it to an ideal state.
This is a defense sector being built by Azov. Everything, as they say, is classic, but the net above is already a modern improvisation.
The so-called anti-drone defense is meant to prevent drops. If an explosion happens here, all the debris and shrapnel will scatter above.
This line of defense will slow down the Russians' movement towards Konstantinovka if they manage to capture Toretsk.
There's a real disaster in the Russian army. There's just no equipment. Russians are going into battle with whatever they can find. Right now, it's a real trend. Assault in Zhigulis. In the SU, whole groups of Russian attack aircraft are brutally destroyed in cars. For more details on this defeat, check out the story.
Attacking in old Zhigulis or Ladas has now become a reality for the so-called Second Army in the world. Here's one of the latest striking examples. On the Luhansk front, the liberators are pushing for a breakthrough. In pink Zhigulis. The stocks of military equipment for the Russians are rapidly depleting, and they can't be replenished. So the only solution is civilian automotive production.
Lada cars, not just the Zhiguli models, but also the slightly more powerful Nivas, have started appearing in large numbers in Russian assault units, as the stocks of armored vehicles began to deplete significantly a few months ago.
The reasons for such losses are the Ukrainian drones, which are conducting a real hunt on the front lines as soon as even one Russian tank appears.
According to the Russian side, Ukraine has total superiority in FPV drones. This is what allows the Ukrainian defense forces neutralize the numerical advantage of the enemy in heavy armored vehicles.
A series of publications by the American publication Forbes asserts that the use of Zhiguli vehicles by the Russian army could be a turning point.
When the first Russian assault teams climbed into their Zhiguli cars last fall and launched near-suicidal attacks on the drone-patrolled no man's land in eastern Ukraine, one could have dismissed the attacks in Zhigulis as isolated incidents carried out by the most desperate and equipment-deprived Russian units. It's no longer realistic to paint such a rosy picture of the Russian army's mechanization efforts, with losses in armored vehicles and other heavy equipment exceeding 15,000. Attacks in Zhigulis are becoming increasingly common.
The losses of armored vehicles in the Russian army are approximately 6,000 units per year. Previously, the Kremlin compensated for these losses by depreserving Soviet equipment. But now there's almost none left, as these stocks are not limitless.
The Russian Federation currently has the capability to produce heavy armored vehicles up to 200 units per year. But considering the losses on the front line, these are minimal figures that don't even address the tactical level tasks of the occupying army in Ukraine. Therefore, the Russian defense industry at the moment prioritizes not production, but rather the restoration of armored vehicles. It's worth noting that these are mostly old tanks. This is the T-55, T-54. This is two.
Of course, the assaults of 2025 are different from the assaults at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, as the occupiers realized that large mechanized breakthroughs only lead to greater losses in equipment and personnel. But the attacks in Zhigulis also indicate that the Russian army is reaching a critical point in terms of restoring its equipment.
The normalization of attacks using Ladas is a clear sign that this turning point has been crossed. With each day of Russia's increasingly large-scale war in Ukraine, the Russians will have less and less armored vehicles, and they will increasingly rely on compact vehicles to deliver troops into battle.
Going into an attack in a Zhiguli is clearly a one-way ticket. And whether this lucky ticket is something the Russian soldier wants to draw is up to him alone.
Wow! In Russia, hellish explosions have quieted down. Everything is on fire. Ukrainian drones have smashed the enemy's oil refinery to pieces. As a result, the Russian army is already critically short. Fuel, right now, exclusive footage from Russia.
The Russian army lost more than 20,000 soldiers in Belogorovka, Chasiv Yar and Toretsk in the Donetsk region from April 2024 to February 2025. Of these, thousands are irretrievable losses. Such data is provided by analysts from the Deep State Project, and such a reduction in personnel could force the enemy to prioritize their offensive operations.
The resources are not what they used to be. Unfortunately, for the second year in a row, they are struggling to carry out strategic offensive operations. And that's why they are forced to to prioritize their actions accordingly. We see this both in Kursk and on the Eastern Front, particularly in this Pokrovsk direction. Here, and but they haven't given up on their plans yet.
Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the Russian army attacked near the settlements of Ivanovka, Yampolovka, and in the Serebryansky forest. Ukrainian defenders also repelled Russian assaults in the area of Vashukivka, Stupachki, and Belya Gora on the Kramatorsk bridgehead. And at the hottest Pokrovsk direction, the invaders were desperately trying to break through the defense. In Novotoretsky, Yelizavetovka, Promen, Novoalexandrovka, Andreevka, and Ulakli. The Russian occupiers also carried out airstrikes on Mirolyubovka, Zverevo, and Pokrovsk.
No, there are no longer, so to speak, such rates of advancement and task completion, including, of course, it is essential for them to cut off the Kudesiskaya road, Konstantinovka, in general, movement in this direction. And here too, we are managing to hold our positions for now. Well, that is the situation with Pokrovsk and around it. Says that we need to stay strong. Despite the gravity out of the situation, for the Ukrainian defense forces, they are highly professional and motivated. And when it becomes possible to count this, there is the effectiveness of conducting combat operations.
In the Kramatorsk direction, the border guard successfully repelled several waves of assaults from Russian armored groups. This was reported by the operational strategic group of troops Khortytsia. According to the military, the Russians are actively changing their tactics, using armored vehicles to break through defensive lines and create pathways for further attacks. However, the pilots of the reconnaissance strike drone systems Phoenix from the Revenge Brigade delivered precise strikes on the enemy's infantry, weaponry, and armored vehicles. The remaining equipment was blown up in the minefield. Thus, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and other armored vehicles were destroyed. Ukrainian defenders also demonstrated how they repelled the Russian assault on the village of Lazovaya in the Kupiansk direction. The Russian soldiers made an attempt to advance in the evening, hoping to approach unnoticed in the dark. However, the warriors of the 429th Separate Drone Regiment, Achilles, together with the National Guard soldiers of the 1st Presidential Brigade Bureau V and the paratroopers of the 77th Air Assault Brigade, timely detected and destroyed Russian equipment. Specifically, they destroyed 4 enemy BMPs along with their crews. And near Volchansk in the Kharkiv region, drone operators from the Guard Brigade delivered precise strikes on the enemy's positions during one of their sorties. Ukrainian defenders destroyed an observation post, a firing position, a drone launch point, a fuel and lubricants depot, as well as several bunkers and trench lines of the Russian occupiers. At the same time, the invaders are experiencing fuel problems in the left bank of the Kherson region. That's why the enemy's howitzers are turning into easy targets, reported the partisan movement Atish. Agents recorded a fuel shortage. In the 144th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the Russian Federation, the artillery installations on Mars are fueled with summer diesel, which is why the equipment cannot perform combat tasks. Russia does not understand the problem, but they are unable to resolve it quickly, the partisans note.
Novoshakhtinska, oil refinery. Tuapse, oil refinery. The Druzhba oil pipeline. This is far from a complete list of oil refining industry facilities in Russia that have been targeted by Ukrainian drones and missiles in 2024. In the past year, there were over 80 attacks on oil refining facilities and fuel bases located in Russia, in the annexed Crimea, and in the occupied territories of Ukraine. Since the beginning of 2025, the armed forces of Ukraine have attacked at least 27 fuel and energy facilities in 16 regions of Russia. The most strikes were on oil refineries in the Krasnodar Krai, with at least 5 shellings. Targets were also hit in the Bryansk, Belgorod, Nizhny Novgorod, Smolensk, Volgograd, Rostov, Kaluga, Saratov, Pony, Ryazane, Saubo-Osad, Oryol, and Voronezh regions. In the Astrakhan, Samara, Tula regions, and the Republic of Tatarstan. Both oil refineries that supply fuel for Russian military equipment and factories that provide fuel for the domestic market have come under attack. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also highlighted the important economic factor of the strikes on Russian oil refineries.
For every $2 invested in our long-range capabilities, we are already inflicting almost $10 in losses on Russia. This is the necessary dynamic. Russia needs to feel the cost of war in order to truly desire peace.
The series of drone attacks has led to unscheduled equipment repairs under the conditions of Western technological sanctions. Just last year, attacks by Ukrainian drones brought production at Russian oil refineries down to a 12-year low. In 2025, the number of raids has only increased, and this will lead to an even greater decline.
According to reports from the Russian Federation itself, oil refineries have suspended production in Nizhny Novgorod region after drone strikes by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense. A similar fate befell the Ryazan oil refinery, which, by the way, is located only 200 kilometers from the Russian capital. And it provided fuel and lubricants not only for the Russian army, but primarily for the capital region. The Ukrainian side can have a significant impact not only on economic factors, but also on influences to have a very significant influence not only on economic factors, but also on influences in addition to the Russian Federation has been restored. But first and foremost, to disrupt the logistics of the occupying forces.
Besides, the economic attack on the oil refineries also has a psychological impact. Russians see the war not just on TV as something far away, but right next to them, right under their homes. On the night of Wednesday, February 19th, Ukrainian drones seriously damaged the Syzran oil refinery. The operation of the plant, which produced fuel, aviation kerosene, and bitumen, played an important role in supplying the Russian army. Suspended indefinitely.
Veterans of the so-called special military operation returning from the front pose a deadly threat to Russia. The country is on the brink of large-scale epidemics of hepatitis and HIV, which are rapidly spreading among the military and transitioning into civilian society. How has the war affected the situation? Why are the authorities silent? What consequences await the Russian population? Watch the story.
New gifts for relatives and loved ones from the Russian occupiers. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, soldiers were sending home stolen washing machines, clothes, and household appliances from Ukrainian homes. Now, returning on leave or after being wounded, soldiers are bringing back items from the front in large numbers. Hepatitis, HIV, and AIDS.
The absolute number of people identified with HIV infection remains the highest in the European region of the World Health Organization and one of the highest in the world.
In Russia, this diagnosis effectively closes all doors for a person. People who are HIV positive are not wanted for jobs, they are denied mortgage loans, and the fact is, they are basically written off from all accounts. And if it's nearly impossible to find a decent job with an infectious diagnosis like hepatitis, the army will take you without any hesitation if you have such an ailment.
And plus, after they started paying such huge sums for signing the contract, some people with HIV went into service. They decided to hide their HIV status. And since the military enlistment officers need to meet certain quotas, they also turned a blind eye to this.
Shoigu, a well-known thief and fantasist. The reality is that infected people are being drafted into service with almost no medical examination. What kind of diagnosis can there be when they are recruiting people from prisons, where almost half of the inmates have HIV and hepatitis?
This has even become a sort of business in Russia. As soon as a soldier with hepatitis receives the promised one-time payment from the government for signing the contract, it turns out that the soldier is sick and he is discharged to the reserves. But all these couple of months in training, he has hepatitis, or even worse, is sick. HIV manages to infect a large portion of their fellow soldiers.
I have a socially significant disease, hepatitis. I've had it for 8 months now. I'm constantly being shoved into different battalions, into assault units, into fortified ones. They constantly threaten. They are zeroing out, throwing people into pits, katramash, chaining them up with handcuffs. The command is pushing for what? To make us infect the Russian army.
It's hard to disagree with the words of the chief about hepatitis. Not only did the Russian command through, the fingers are pointing at the sick recruits, and no one in the ranks of the Russian army is in a hurry to acknowledge the problem. In the end, it all turns into a real epidemic, and none of the Russian generals even try to fight it.
This environment is in any warring army, the Russian and the Ukrainian. But there are some specific features in the Russian one. What kind? And the informational ones. Hepatitis is being hushed up, because if they acknowledge the fact of hepatitis appearing, they'll have to implement anti-epidemic measures to insert themselves on the front line or in the rest area of the servicemen, isolate them there. And it's also necessary to find out where the infection came from. And what does that mean? Report on drug addiction. About same-sex love? Well, not at all.
The most that soldiers with hepatitis and AIDS can expect in the Russian army is a couple of weeks in a hospital bed at the nearest hospital where they, again, reinfect everyone they can.
I earned money in Moscow. Hepatitis. There you go. Osteomyelitis, legs. Right now I need help.
Along with the troops, hepatitis went into battle. To be more precise, 5 hepatitis brigades.
Externally healthy soldiers returning home may harbor a deadly threat inside. Not knowing about their condition, these patients continue to spread the virus even in civilian life among their relatives, friends, and acquaintances they come into contact with.
War has always spawned and intensified epidemics, from the Spanish flu to the plague, from African and Asian diseases, from mercenaries to tuberculosis. The special military operation has become a deadly melting pot of infections from around the world.
On top of that, Russian doctors complain that after the start of the special military operation, the government completely abandoned most programs for the prevention of hepatitis, HIV, and AIDS.
And since recently, the budget has been heavily redirected towards military needs. Of course, this couldn't help but affect the social sphere, particularly healthcare. And so in particular, in the area of HIV infection, we see a kind of disconnect and instability as well.
In recent years, the Kremlin hasn't been very attentive to the vaccination of its own citizens.
Vaccination campaigns have largely been disrupted, and there are no imported vaccines. There is only the vaccination material. Russian healthcare is not always of good quality.
As a result, the chances of contracting hepatitis or a much more exotic and deadly disease from soldiers in Russia are increasing every day. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has closed over 100 medical facilities across Russia to save money for the war. According to Russian journalists, the pace of hospital closures has skyrocketed more than 5 times compared to previous years. It seems Putin doesn't need sick Russians. He only needs new and more soldiers.
The command of the armed forces of the Russian Federation treats its soldiers as expendable resources.
A month and a half ago, they returned from the mission to the hospital, and they still can't get in. They walk around like they're brave with sticks.
In the hospital, they just throw people out. They say they are seriously wounded, healthy as a bull.
Despite various injuries, they are all forcibly kept at the front.
The security service is taking off the casks from our guys. They take off the casks, confiscate the crutches, and prepare them to carry out combat missions. The guys are limping. In wheelchairs, they're being shoved into cars. The security service has lost its fear.
All of this is happening due to a lack of personnel and the heavy losses of the Russian army.
2 more, 1, 2. It's something visible from under the snow. What you can't get used to is because of the bang. Here they are lying. All ours.
If before, soldiers with diagnosed pneumonia or tachycardia were sent from military hospitals to the front, now soldiers are increasingly seen at the front with crutches or sticks.
Here are the soldiers, all with sticks. Some are injured in the arms, some in the legs. Well, I don't know what to say. I'm deaf, also with a stick.
The British Ministry of Defence's intelligence reports that the command of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is forming assault groups from wounded Russians.
Like this, so they don't see the phone. We're filming the whole... They're rewriting, and the guys went on the assault. Now, they'll go in the evening or in the morning. They will be taken to Myklevka and sent off just like that. Yeah, here are the guys. We're here.
I remember the 20th Combined Arms Army, which, according to British intelligence, could form assault groups made from wounded soldiers.
To be continued, the 20th Army. Soldier, there was an incident at Mopel 50 happened.
There is a realistic possibility that Russian commanders are directing this activity to support personnel who would otherwise get lost in the overwhelmed medical system.
One of the fighters in the video says that he signed a contract, went on combat missions 5 times, and received 2 serious injuries and a brain injury.
Everything's fine. I served. Yeah. I went into battle 5 times, got 2 serious injuries, and the brain injury is serious. The mental hospital acknowledged it without weapons. Right now, they don't hang weapons. They lead and transport to the front without any problems. They have about 20 armies like that. Here's this G30.
I was also at the front where you want everything to heal, so here's a sneaker. I can give it to you.
The occupiers send injured and shell-shocked soldiers into the attack to intensify their assaults despite slow progress and heavy losses.
The army is running out of steam. To advance in the way that was done in the fall, it's going to be very difficult from here on out. It will require some incredible, just unimaginable sacrifices, new ones. A new recruitment, a global recruitment for contracts or mobilization. And accordingly, these new assaults, so that people die.
Russians are using their wounded comrades as expendable material. Torture, violence, threats, and reprisals.
If they give it to me there, weapon for me, with such a hand.
And they'll find the boots with a leg like that. Then let's go. Well, it's already a circus, really a circus. They won't let you recover in peace. They are being shoved somewhere, tossed from one place to another.
This footage was captured by a drone. You can see how the enemy is using occupiers on crutches in attempts to detect the firing positions of the defense forces. The updated report states that 840,000 Russian soldiers have already been wounded or killed. About 400,000 won are in need of treatment in medical facilities outside the combat zone.
Just yesterday, 50 people left. 50 people. Today, we will return one wounded person in very serious condition. It's 300 out of 50 people. 49 was all 200, 1 300.
Out of 30 guys, only 2 are alive. Both are 300 and in serious condition. These are confirmed facts and have resonated across the internet. In this part, there are a large number of losses, so-called 300s.
And this is a storm with serious injuries. Back to battle, they have been deprived of the opportunity to recover.
They aren't treated at all. Absolutely nothing. They are treated. They are bandaged. Exactly. There's no proper incubation for them. In short, that is, the operations that they are supposed to carry out.
The occupiers also complain about the lack of proper medical assistance in special facilities located further from the front line.
Basically, this anthracite, so the hospital we are currently in looks kind of like a prison. So, as I explained, there are 110 people at MTZ, 1 toilet, constant lines for bandaging, lines without painkillers. They are poking around, crawling. The relationships are terrible.
The medical burden falls back on the military units where they don't treat but rather mutilate. On TV, they beat and tortured soldiers with injuries using a taser who they want to send back to the front. Some are luckier than others. They end up in elite areas of Russia, for example, near Rubliovka. But due to a lack of space in the hospitals, the wounded occupiers have started to be placed in the gynecology department.
Actually, the world has gone mad. And it's very scary what's happening. In this world, 20 meters away in the hospital in Romale, they are lying in the gynecology department. It's all packed. Everything is very serious.
According to the law, military personnel who have sustained combat injuries can claim several benefits. But that's not beneficial for the Kremlin. The authorities are trying in every way to save on payments to military personnel. In 2025, Putin plans to allocate almost a third of the federal budget for defense, which amounts to trillions of rubles. To replenish the ranks of the army, the Kremlin is increasing bonuses and social benefits for recruits. But not everyone is aware of what awaits them when they want to make money. Easy, bloody rubles in the war against Ukraine. That's all for now. Well, for more fiery news from the front, stay tuned for the next episode.